This is my true story. I raised my daughter with love, taught her kindness, and believed she'd care for me in my old age. But I was wrong. One evening, while I reached for a meal, she shouted, "Stop eating our food." And the next morning, she locked the refrigerator, like I was a thief. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out loud. I just called my lawyer, and what I did after that, she will never forget. Before I tell you how I made sure she lost everything, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so this story reaches the ones who need to hear it most. I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't handed anything easy. I worked for every scrap, every coin, every bit of peace I ever had. When I was young, I cleaned houses. Then later, I cooked in school kitchens. Then in the evenings, I did ironing for the neighbors to earn a little more. My hands were always busy. My back always ached. But I did it all with love, because I had a daughter, and I wanted her to have more than I ever did. She was my only child, my world. I raised her on my own after my husband died in a factory accident when she was just 9. I didn't date again. I didn't take time off. I didn't rest. I gave her my whole life without ever asking for anything in return. I remember those nights when we had just enough food for one. I always told her I wasn't hungry, then watched her eat every bite. I smiled and washed the empty pan, pretending I was full. I wore the same pair of shoes for 10 years so she could have decent uniforms. When she got sick, I stayed up all night holding her hand, whispering lullabies in the dark to keep her calm. And when she grew up and started dreaming about college, I took out a loan, with my name, my future, my security on the line. I paid for every exam, every tuition fee, even the rent for her small apartment near the campus. I sold my gold bangles, my mother's bangles, just to keep her enrolled for one more semester. And when she got married, I paid for most of the wedding. Her dress, the decorations, the food, even some of the honeymoon expenses. She cried at the altar and hugged me and said, "I'll take care of you forever now, Ma." I believed her. After her second child was born, she told me it would be easier if I moved in. "You'll be more comfortable with us. You'll have family around you, and we'll all help each other." My knees had started to hurt. I got tired quicker. It made sense. So I packed my things and moved into the guest room. At first, it was nice. The grandkids would run into my arms. She would let me stir the curry pot or fold laundry. I never asked for anything. I stayed out of their way. I just wanted to be close to them. And I was. Until I wasn't. Until the mood in the house changed. Until my presence went from comfort to cost. And the woman I raised with tears and devotion, she became someone I no longer recognized. It started with whispers. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. A passing comment here, a sharp look there. One evening, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard her say to her husband in the kitchen, "We go through groceries so fast now, it's like feeding a third child." I stayed silent, told myself she didn't mean it like that. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was stressed. I've lived long enough to know that people speak carelessly when life weighs heavy on them. But the comments didn't stop. They became sharper, more pointed. She began writing down the grocery list on the fridge with notes beside certain items, "For kids' lunches only," or "Don't touch." Once I accidentally used a yogurt cup labeled Dad's, and later that night she snapped, "That was for him, Ma. You could have asked." I stood there in silence, holding the empty container in my hand like I'd committed a crime. She started asking questions about how many times I boiled the kettle during the day. Said the electricity bill had gone up. Said maybe I should stop using the heater in my room so much, even though my joints hurt in the cold. She sighed every time I opened a cabinet, rolled her eyes when I sat down at the dinner table, and when I asked if I could have a little space in the kitchen to keep my tea and biscuits, she scoffed and said, "This is not a hotel, Ma." Her tone changed. Her posture changed. She no longer called me to come eat. I had to wait until everyone finished, then serve myself what was left. If there was any rice stuck to the pan, that's what I ate. If there were leftovers, I wrapped them up quickly and said thank you, even when no one was listening. And still, I tried to justify it. Told myself she was going through something, that maybe the stress of raising kids and managing work had worn her down. I told myself I should be more helpful, so I cleaned the bathroom without being asked, picked up toys from the floor, cooked dinner once or twice, even though she said later, "The kids didn't like it, Ma." Then one afternoon, as I passed by her room, I heard her on the phone, laughing with a friend. She said, "I swear, she just sits there all day, uses our stuff, doesn't lift a finger. It's like having a freeloader in your house who thinks she's a saint." That word, freeloader, it hit me in the gut like a brick. I stood outside the door, frozen. My own daughter, the child I had fed, clothed, raised with every cell in my body, now described me like some burden, some leech, as if the decades of sacrifice I made were invisible, as if all I had done was consume and take and mope. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of every penny I ever spent on her, every bowl of rice I left untouched so she could have more, every call I ignored from relatives who said I was spoiling her, every backbreaking hour I worked to make sure she had shoes without holes, every stitch I sewed, every fever I nursed, every night I stayed up to make her feel safe in a world that frightened her. Now I was the freeloader. I thought about packing my bags. I even started folding a few clothes into a small case. But where would I go? I had no siblings left. My old friends had passed. A senior home? I still wasn't ready for that. And besides, she said she wanted me here, said she'd take care of me. But the truth was clear now. She didn't want me. She tolerated me. She resented me. And that truth, silent and bitter, clung to every corner of that house like smoke. Still, I held my tongue. Still, I stayed. Still, I hoped it would get better. But it didn't. It got worse. Because one night, after all the jabs, all the sighs, all the little humiliations that chip away at your spirit, she said something I never thought I'd hear from her mouth. Words that would shatter everything that once felt like love. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night that drags, when the air feels heavy and the silence in the house stretches just a little too long. Her husband was working late. The kids were upstairs watching cartoons. I was in the kitchen, quietly boiling water for tea. I always tried to be invisible in those moments, taking up as little space as possible, moving slow so the cabinet doors didn't creak. I even wore socks to mute my footsteps. That night, I hadn't eaten anything since morning, just water and one dry toast. I opened the fridge slowly, careful not to let it swing wide. Inside were some leftovers, rice, a little dal, and a plastic container with 2 pieces of fried chicken. My hands moved toward the rice. Then I paused. That chicken, I didn't want it. I just noticed it. I closed the fridge, but I should have known she was watching. She came out from around the corner like she had been waiting for this. "What did you just take?" she said. I turned, startled. "Nothing, just water, Beta." "Don't lie to me, Ma," she said, voice sharp and cold. "That chicken was for tomorrow." I stood still. I didn't touch it. I only looked. She walked past me, opened the fridge like a detective, stared inside for a long time, and then slammed it shut. "I'm done with this," she muttered. "You think you can just help yourself to everything in this house?" "I haven't taken anything," I said again, softly. "I just wanted tea." She glared at me. "You act like a victim all the time," she said, "always with that sad little face. You make everyone feel guilty. It's manipulation. You've done this your whole life." Those words. I couldn't even speak. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I was hollow, like something inside me had been scooped out with an ice cream ladle. She wasn't done. "You're not a guest here," she said. "This is our house. You live here, yes, but stop treating it like everything belongs to you." I whispered, "I never said it did." She laughed, and then she said it, the thing I will never forget. "If you're so hungry all the time, maybe I should just lock the damn fridge." And the next morning, she did. She bought a refrigerator lock, one of those coded padlocks that clamps around the handles, as if I were some stray cat that needed to be kept out. I found it when I came down for breakfast. There it was, shiny, cold, final, no warning, no explanation, just a lock, on the fridge, in my own daughter's home. I stared at it for a full minute, frozen. Not because I couldn't find the words to express how I felt, but because I realized in that moment that there was no point in finding them. She would not understand. She would twist them. She would throw them back at me. I stood there, lips trembling, eyes burning. She walked in with her coffee and said, "From now on, just ask. It's better this way." Then she left, as if what she had done was completely reasonable. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I walked to my room. I sat on the bed. I stared at the window, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to leave. I was going to do something she never saw coming. I reached for my drawer, pulled out my old phone, the one she said I barely needed, because who are you even texting? And I made a call, not to a friend, not to a therapist. I called my lawyer, because a long time ago, when my husband passed and the inheritance came, I put her name on a few things. Some property, some shares, some insurance. I trusted her, but I never signed over ownership, not fully, not legally, and what she didn't know was that I still held the final say. She locked her fridge? Fine. I was about to lock her entire future. When the phone connected, I heard his voice, calm, professional, steady. Mr. Menon had handled my affairs for over a decade. He'd been there when my husband passed, when the will was read, when I signed the trust papers. He always told me, "You don't need to understand every detail, ma'am. Just know that nothing moves unless you say so." That day, those words came back with new weight. I told him everything, not with anger, not with tears, just facts. I told him about the locked fridge, the chicken, the way she spoke to me like I was an intruder in her home, like a pest, like a ghost who overstayed her welcome. I told him what she said, "You're not a guest here." And he listened, with that silence lawyers have when they're not just hearing, but building. When I finished, I asked, "Is there anything I can do?" He said, "You can do everything." And just like that, my backbone returned. We met the next day at a quiet cafe. I hadn't left the house in months without telling her where I was going. That morning, I didn't say a word. I dressed in my cleanest sari, pinned my graying hair into a neat bun, and walked out the front door. She didn't notice. She was upstairs, shouting at one of the kids over toothpaste. At the cafe, Mr. Menon opened his laptop and laid out everything I had forgotten. The joint property, still under my name. The bank accounts where I had quietly kept my savings. The insurance policy I had paid into for 30 years. The shares in my late husband's company that had quietly multiplied in value. And the family home back in Kerala, the one she told everyone was sold years ago. It wasn't. "Do you want to remove her from all this?" he asked. "You don't need her permission. You just need to sign." I looked at the screen. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was clarity. She thought I was weak because I was quiet. She mistook humility for helplessness. But she had forgotten something very simple. A mother may forgive, but a woman with dignity does not beg. I signed the papers, one by one, and when I finished, he looked up and said, "Would you like to send her notice now or later?" I smiled, just slightly. Let her find out when she asks me for money. Because I knew it was coming. She always needed something: school fees, utility bills, loan top-ups. And when she did, I wanted to see the expression change, from control to confusion, from pride to panic. I walked home that day different, not taller, not louder, just still, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. And when I saw the fridge lock again, shining in the kitchen light, I laughed, because I wasn't hungry anymore. It happened 3 days later, the moment I'd waited for, a moment so quiet, so casual, you wouldn't have guessed everything was about to fall apart. She came into my room mid-morning, holding her phone, fake smiling like she used to when she wanted something. I was knitting near the window, the sunlight warming my knees. She leaned on the doorframe and said, "Ma, can you transfer 10,000, school books, and Anuji's therapy is due?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, properly, like I hadn't done in months. Her painted face, her impatient eyes, the slight twitch in her jaw that always gave away her nerves. I closed my knitting gently and set it aside. "Ask Mr. Menon," I said. She blinked. "Who?" I said it again, this time slower. "Ask. Mr. Menon." For a second, her smile didn't break, but her eyes did. That flicker, that crack. I stood up and walked past her, calm, collected. Left her standing there with her mouth slightly open, questions circling her mind like vultures. Later that evening, the messages began. First polite. "Ma, what did you mean?" Then defensive. "Are you hiding something from me?" Then furious. "What did you do?" I didn't answer any of them, because the silence was louder than any reply. By the next morning, her husband had called twice, then her father-in-law, then the school accountant. They were all confused, all looking for answers she didn't have. I sat in the kitchen, sipping tea from the same chipped cup she once said was too ugly for guests. Now it was mine again. Every inch of the house began to feel mine again, not by ownership, but by presence. The day after that, a courier arrived, a thick white envelope with her name on it. I didn't open it, just placed it neatly on the dining table. She saw it as soon as she came downstairs and froze. "What is that?" she asked. "Ask Mr. Menon," I said again. She opened it in front of me, and as her eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. Every asset, every document she thought she'd quietly absorbed, gone from her reach. The trust, the bank account, the insurance, even the power of attorney she thought was still valid, revoked. She tried to argue. "You don't understand these things. You don't know what you're doing. Who tricked you?" I stood up, slow and firm, looked her in the eye, and I said, "I may not understand everything, but I understand this. I don't belong in a house where a fridge lock tells me who I am." She didn't speak, didn't move. She stood there, exposed, not just to me, but to herself, because she finally saw what she had become, and what I had stopped being, her victim. That night, she didn't eat dinner. And the next morning, the lock was gone, not with a speech, not with an apology, just quietly unscrewed, as if it had never been there. But I left it sitting on the table, as a reminder of the day everything changed. After that morning, something in the air shifted, not just inside our house, but around it. In our neighborhood, whispers travel faster than light, and they don't stop at walls. The day the refrigerator lock vanished and the envelope arrived, her silence became noticeable. She stopped posting those glossy pictures of her family meals. No more Instagram stories of fancy dinners or yoga poses with inspirational quotes. Because she knew, people were starting to ask questions. It began with Mrs. Batra from next door. She had always been overly cheerful to my daughter, praising her generosity for letting me live with them. That day, she brought me freshly made parathas and lingered longer than usual. "You're looking strong these days," she said with a curious smile. "Peace suits you." I didn't respond with words. I just smiled, that calm, firm smile that says you have no idea what I've seen. The milkman noticed too. He knocked one morning, handed me the bill directly, and said, "They told me to ask you now, Amma." His eyes said more than his words. He knew who was in charge again. It wasn't long before her friends began calling less. The ones who used to gather for weekend brunches stopped showing up, and when they did, it was brief, awkward. She started retreating into the house, barely stepping out. The confident strut in her walk became stiff. Her tone, once sharp and commanding, grew softer, but not out of kindness, out of fear, because the world she built was built on a lie that I was weak, that I needed her, that I should be grateful for every crumb. But once that lie collapsed, everything else followed. At the temple, women I hadn't spoken to in years came up to me. "We heard what happened," one whispered. "You were brave." I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of leaking out in pieces, like slow, sharp rainfall. She started getting stares in the market. Her posture changed. She was defensive now, looking around before speaking, checking over her shoulder like a guilty child. Her husband began staying out later. Their son, my grandson, no longer came running to me with fear in his eyes. Now, he sat beside me on the porch after school, reading books, laughing when I teased him. The bond we were never allowed to build, it began to grow, and she hated it. One evening, I overheard her yelling on the phone, in the bedroom, door shut, but I could still catch pieces. "She's turning everyone against me. I don't know how she got those papers. It was just a lock. Why is this happening to me?" That's when I realized she still didn't get it. She thought this was about revenge. She was wrong. This wasn't about punishing her. This was about restoring me. The lock wasn't just a lock. It was the symbol of everything I had swallowed in silence. The humiliation, the control, the erasure. And when I removed it, I wasn't just removing metal. I was removing her power. One by one, the things she had taken for granted began slipping away. Her in-laws stopped trusting her judgment. Her husband began keeping financial records separate. Even her best friend started asking more questions than she liked. It wasn't because I exposed her directly. I never told anyone the full story. I didn't need to. People recognize cruelty, especially when it's done with a smile. And now that the smile had cracked, everyone could see what lay underneath. She tried to win sympathy again, volunteering at the school, organizing a food drive, even hugging me in front of others like she was making peace. But I didn't play along. I let her hug me. But I didn't return it, because forgiveness without change is just another trick. She would have to earn her way back, and not through grand gestures, through truth. One day at the grocer's, I heard two women murmuring behind me. "She locked her mother's food," one whispered. "God will punish that," said the other. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The community was already speaking, and she was already shrinking. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible, and she wasn't invincible. It all reached its breaking point one rainy evening in late July. Monsoon clouds had rolled in over the city, casting long shadows across the walls of our house. The roads were flooded, the windows streaked with water, and the air inside felt heavier than usual. Something was brewing, and not just in the sky. You could feel it, in her footsteps, in her silence, in the way she avoided my gaze at dinner, spooning food onto her plate without a word. That day, she had returned from a failed job interview, the third one this month. Her eyes were puffy, her voice brittle, but there was no apology, no humility, just frustration building inside her like a dam about to burst. She sat in the living room with her arms crossed, pretending to scroll on her phone, but her fingers barely moved. She was watching me, listening to every sound I made in the kitchen. I wasn't doing anything dramatic, just preparing my evening tea, boiling water, crushing cardamom, a simple act. But to her, that clink of the spoon was thunder. That soft hiss of boiling milk was insult, because I was calm, at peace, in control, and she hated it. Finally, she snapped. "Why are you still here?" she said without looking up. I froze, not in fear, but in astonishment, because she said it out loud. All those years of passive aggression, of masked cruelty, and now she had finally said it. "Why are you still in this house, acting like the queen, like nothing happened, like you didn't turn everyone against me?" I turned off the stove. Let the silence sit between us for a moment. Let her words echo in her own head. Then I spoke, softly. "I'm here because this is my house, because your father and I built this roof, because I fed you in this kitchen, and because I survived everything you tried to erase me with." She stood up suddenly, voice rising. "You humiliated me. You think you're some kind of victim? You don't know what pressure I was under, taking care of this house, this family, with no help." I didn't raise my voice. Taking care doesn't mean control. She laughed bitterly, stepping closer. "You think locking a fridge was abuse? That giving structure was cruelty? You were eating junk, wasting food." "No," I cut in, still calm. "I was being treated like a burden." That word stopped her. She flinched, because she had said it before, in whispers, in arguments, in the way she rolled her eyes when I asked for things. Burden. "I did what I had to do to keep this house running," she hissed. "You wouldn't understand responsibility." That made me smile, the kind of smile only the truly hurt can give. "I've known responsibility since I was 12, since I married at 17, since I carried 3 children through fever, hunger, and silence. You don't lecture me on sacrifice." Her husband entered the room just then, holding an umbrella, dripping wet. He sensed the tension immediately, but didn't speak. He stood in the doorway like a bystander at a crime scene, unsure whether to intervene or walk away. My daughter turned to him in desperation. "Say something! She's poisoning this house against me!" But he didn't. He just looked at her, then at me, then stepped aside, because he knew. She broke down crying, not soft, weeping tears, but angry, loud, choking sobs, the kind that come not from pain, but from collapse. She slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Everyone thinks I'm the villain," she sobbed. "I'm not. I was just trying to do the right thing." I walked over to her slowly and sat beside her, not to comfort, but to confront gently. "You became the villain the day you chose control over care, the day you locked that door, not just to food, but to love, to dignity, to memory. You forgot who raised you." She didn't respond. Her shoulders shook, her breath ragged. I stood up, poured my tea, and walked out of the room, not as a victor, but as someone who had finally been heard. That was the moment it all changed. Not because she apologized, she didn't. Not because she begged, she never would, but because the balance shifted. For the first time, she faced herself, not the curated version on her phone, not the praised version at parties, but the real one, the one who had pushed too far, hurt too deeply, and lost control. The house remained quiet for days after that, like the walls themselves were processing what had happened. She cooked, but didn't comment, cleaned, but didn't complain. I watched her closely, not to catch her fail, but to see if there was anything left of the daughter I once loved. And slowly, I saw it. In the way she left the groceries I liked on the counter, in how she stopped locking her door at night, in how she sat a little longer at dinner, listening instead of talking. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was a start. The breaking point didn't destroy her, it humbled her. And for the first time in years, our house felt like a home again, not built on fear or shame, but on cracks where light could enter. It had been nearly 6 weeks since that rainy night. The shouting, the silence that followed, the slow, uncomfortable thaw between 2 people who had once been everything to each other, and then somehow, nothing. Each day after the argument had been quiet, almost too quiet. No slammed doors, no sarcastic jabs, no muttered insults from across the hallway. Just the sound of real life, clocks ticking, utensils clinking, the creak of the old wooden staircase. Things that had been drowned out for so long by tension. And in that stillness, I began to write. Not because I needed revenge, not anymore. I had already won in the only way that mattered, by surviving her, by standing up and still standing. But even survival needs a purpose. And I realized mine was this: to speak, not just so she would listen, but so I could finally be free. I wrote a letter, one that I never intended to send, not to a court, not to a lawyer, but to her, my daughter. It began simply: "My dearest child, if you ever remember the version of me that you once loved, this letter is for her." There was something powerful about writing it by hand. The way the pen scratched the paper, the way my fingers ached. Yet I didn't stop. I wrote about the little things. How I remembered the way she used to fall asleep with her thumb in her mouth, clutching a tiny yellow blanket. How she used to run to me after school with muddy shoes and stories I couldn't quite understand, but always smiled at anyway. I reminded her of the birthday she cried because the cake melted, and I told her it was magic, that the candles had granted her wish too fast. But I also wrote the hard things. I told her how it felt the first time she rolled her eyes at me like I was stupid, the first time she forgot my birthday, the first time she locked me out of the kitchen because old people make messes. I told her what it felt like when I realized I had become furniture in her life, something to dust off, push aside, or ignore. "I was your mother before I was your burden," I wrote, "and I stayed even when you stopped being my daughter." There were no accusations in the letter, no venom, just truth, raw, heavy, simple. I explained how dignity feels when it's stripped slowly, not by strangers, but by someone you once held in your arms. How it feels to ask for water and be told to wait. How it feels to knock on a fridge door like a beggar. How it feels to realize you are no longer seen, just managed. But I also wrote about hope. I told her that I believed people could come back from darkness, that silence isn't always absence, that maybe, just maybe, the girl who cried over a melted cake still lived somewhere inside the woman who shouted at her mother. I folded the letter slowly, pressed it flat, and slid it into an envelope. No stamp, no address, just her name, written in my handwriting, the same way I used to label her notebooks for school. For a week, I kept the letter in my drawer, not because I was afraid to give it, but because I was waiting for her to earn it. And then one morning, something small happened, something only a mother would notice. She poured 2 cups of tea instead of 1, set them on the table without a word, and waited for me to sit. That was all. No apology, no performance, just a gesture. So I gave her the letter. She didn't open it right away. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just held it in her hands like it weighed more than paper. And then she walked to her room. I didn't follow. Hours passed, maybe a full day. I didn't ask. And then the next morning, I found something on my pillow. Not a letter, but a photo. An old one, from the early 1990s. She was 5. I was younger, happier. She was sitting on my lap, wearing a birthday crown made of newspaper, laughing so hard her eyes disappeared. On the back, she had written one sentence: "Thank you for never leaving." That was it. No dramatic embrace, no sobbing reconciliation. Just a moment, a seed, a start. From then on, we built something new. Not a perfect relationship, but an honest one. She started asking me things again. Not about bills or chores, but about life, about her childhood, about her father, about why I stayed silent for so long. And I told her, not to punish her, but to show her the strength it takes to keep loving someone who doesn't remember who you are. I saw her begin to change. She became gentler with her own daughter. She started cooking things I liked again, not because I asked, but because she remembered. She let me choose the music in the car. She stopped locking doors. She stopped raising her voice. And one day, as we sat on the front porch, sipping tea in the evening sun, she whispered something that stayed with me. "I didn't know how angry I was until I saw you forgive me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because that was enough. The letter had done its job. It didn't erase the past, but it rebuilt the bridge. Quietly, brick by brick. Every day since then, I've asked myself a single question before I sleep. What will be left behind when I am no longer here? Not money, not property, not even photos, but the way I made people feel, the way I responded when I was hurt, the way I endured without becoming cruel. That is my legacy now, and I choose it with care because after everything I've survived, I finally understand what matters. Pain, humiliation, abandonment. These are not the end of a person. They are the chisels that shape you, layer by layer, into something unbreakable. And though I was broken for a time, living in my own daughter's house, spoken to like a nuisance, locked away like a secret, I emerged with more dignity than the ones who tried to shame me. You see, survival isn't just waking up. It's choosing, every day, to still be kind. Even after betrayal. Even after the people you raised look at you like you're a stranger in your own skin. My daughter will never fully understand what she did. That's the truth I've had to swallow. Some people carry guilt like a suitcase. Others pretend the trip never happened. She falls somewhere in between. There are days when she holds my hand with hesitation, like she's asking permission to begin again. Other days, I catch her watching me from across the room, unsure of what I'm thinking, too proud to ask. But I've stopped needing the apology. I have replaced that need with something greater: clarity. Clarity about who I am, clarity about what I endured, clarity about the strength it took not to disappear inside my bitterness. This is not a story of revenge. It could have been. Believe me, I had enough proof. Photos, voice recordings, written complaints from neighbors. Any lawyer could have turned it into a case. I could have taken the house, taken her daughter, taken her peace. But instead, I chose to take something far more powerful: control over my narrative. Because once you've been silenced long enough, the most radical act isn't to scream, it's to speak with calm. And that's what I've done, not just with her, but with everyone around me, the community who whispered behind my back, the relatives who looked away instead of asking questions, the friends who said, "She's your daughter, you must have done something wrong." I no longer carry their judgment. That's their burden to keep. Mine is lighter now. I joined a local support group, not for therapy, I've done that, but to sit in a circle with people who have faced the same quiet cruelty. The kind that doesn't leave bruises, the kind that hides behind closed doors and smiling holiday photos. We share our stories, not to pity each other, but to remind each other we're not insane. That neglect can be elegant. That disrespect can be inherited like furniture. That just because someone is family doesn't mean they deserve your silence. I've started writing letters for others now. Some ask me to help them find words for their children. Others write to themselves. The younger version, the broken version, the furious version. And I guide them, line by line, until their shame turns into sentences, until their fear becomes a paragraph of truth. They call me the quiet fire in that group. Not because I yell, but because when I speak, nobody moves. My granddaughter visits more often now. She's 12, curious, beautiful, a spark of rebellion in her eyes, but soft around the edges. She asks me about life before Wi-Fi. She thinks dial-up sounds like magic. I tell her about cassette tapes, Sunday church, and how her mother once tried to microwave a frozen hamburger still in its plastic wrap. We laugh. She listens. And sometimes she asks questions that make me pause. Did Mommy ever get in trouble? I don't lie, but I don't weaponize the truth either. I tell her, Mommy made mistakes, big ones, but she's trying. And then I say the most important part. And I chose to forgive her, because I don't want you to grow up thinking pain should last forever. That's the legacy I choose. Not revenge, not bitterness, not secrets, but freedom. Freedom from the need to be right. Freedom from carrying old wounds like trophies. Freedom from the belief that motherhood ends when respect does. Because it doesn't. It evolves. It strengthens. It adapts. And if you're lucky, like me, it returns. In the form of a letter. In the form of a porch conversation. In the form of a granddaughter who looks at you like the sun lives behind your eyes. Yes, my daughter locked me in a basement. Yes, she humiliated me. Yes, she made me feel invisible, like a ghost in my own life. But I didn't vanish. I rose, quietly. And now, when people ask me how I survived, I tell them this, with paper, with ink, with a memory that refused to lie, and with a legacy I wrote myself. She didn't need a palace. She didn't need millions. All she ever wanted was peace, respect, a warm plate, and a kind word. After the will was rewritten and the documents filed, she slowly began the process of letting go. She found a senior community nearby, one where people smiled at her in the hallway, where neighbors knocked just to say hello, and where no one counted the slices of bread she ate. The staff greeted her by name. The kitchen always had fresh soup on the stove. She had her own room with a window that faced a garden. It wasn't luxury, but it was hers. She laughed with other elders over morning tea, joined knitting circles, and read books late into the evening without fear of judgment. No more padlocks, no more whispers behind closed doors. And when they celebrated her birthday with cake and a song, something her daughter had forgotten for years, she cried, not from sadness, but from relief. She had reclaimed her life. When news spread through the family that the will had been changed and the daughter would inherit nothing, there was shock, panic, begging. But she didn't answer the calls. She let the silence speak. Her decision wasn't born from hatred. It was born from years of being unseen, unheard, unloved. And in the end, it was that silence that roared the loudest. Her final years were not spent locked in a room, eating dry bread and swallowing tears. They were spent under the sun, with a garden in bloom, her heart finally unburdened. And when the time came for her story to end, she left behind a letter, placed on the bedside table of her new home. It was short, just one sentence. She locked me out of the fridge. I locked her out of my will, forever.